3 minutes before the hearing started, the woman suing me was laughing. Not smiling, not looking confident, actually laughing. The kind of laugh people have when they think they've already won. I remember sitting at the defense table that morning, watching her lean toward her attorney while they whispered back and forth, both of them grinning like they were discussing where to celebrate after court. If you'd walked into that courtroom right then, you'd probably have assumed I was finished. Honestly, that's exactly what she wanted everyone to think. What she didn't know was that she'd spent the last 8 months building a case against the worst possible person she could have picked a fight with. My name is Daniel Harper, and 5 years ago I retired after 38 years practicing property law across Colorado. After spending most of my adult life arguing with developers, corporations, insurance companies, and people who thought ownership laws were optional suggestions, I wanted peace. Real peace. Not suburban peace where your neighbors complain if your grass gets too long. I wanted distance. Space. Silence. So I bought a ranch. A beautiful 120-acre property outside a tiny town called Red Hollow. The place wasn't fancy. Old fences. A weathered barn. A farmhouse that creaked every time the wind changed direction. But every morning I'd wake up, pour coffee into the same chipped mug, walk onto the porch, and see nothing except open land stretching toward the mountains. For the first year, it was everything I hoped retirement would be. Then Amelia Cross got elected president of the Ridgewood Meadows Homeowners Association. Now here's the funny thing. Ridgewood Meadows wasn't anywhere near my ranch. Their subdivision sat almost 2 miles away. Different roads, different boundaries, different property records, different everything. There wasn't a single legal document connecting my land to that HOA. Not one. Unfortunately, Amelia didn't seem particularly interested in legal documents. She was interested in control. I first met her on a cold October morning. I was repairing fence posts near the front entrance when a black luxury SUV rolled up my driveway. Out stepped a woman in her late 50s wearing designer sunglasses, expensive boots that had clearly never touched actual dirt, and the kind of expression that suggested she expected immediate cooperation from everyone she met. She walked straight toward me holding a clipboard. No introduction. No small talk. No hello. Just business. Mr. Harper? She asked. That's me. I'm Amelia Cross, president of Ridgewood Meadows. She paused, apparently waiting for recognition. When none came, she continued. We're developing a community trail network. I nodded. Sounds nice. We'll need access through your property. For a second I thought she was joking. She wasn't. I actually looked around to see if someone was filming one of those hidden camera prank shows. Nobody was. Amelia opened her clipboard and began explaining her vision. Walking trails, bike paths, community wellness, increased property values, connected outdoor experiences. She spoke for nearly 5 minutes without taking a breath. When she finally stopped, I gave the only answer that mattered. No. Just one word. Simple. Polite. Clear. The smile disappeared from her face so quickly it almost impressed me. I don't think you understand, she said. No, I understand perfectly. The community supports this project. That's wonderful. It benefits everyone. Maybe. Her eyes narrowed. You can't stand in the way of progress. I remember leaning against the fence post and looking directly at her. Miss Cross, this ranch isn't part of your HOA. Never has been. Never will be. What happens in your neighborhood is your business. What happens on my land is mine. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then she gave me a tight smile. The kind people wear when they're imagining your future problems. Well, she said, we'll see about that. I watched her drive away in a cloud of dust. At the time, I thought that would be the end of it. A strange conversation. A stubborn woman. Nothing more. I was wrong. Because what started as a disagreement over a trail system slowly became something much bigger. Something personal. And before long, Amelia Cross wasn't trying to build a walking path anymore. She was trying to make me surrender. What neither of us realized yet was that every move she made was quietly creating the evidence that would eventually destroy her. And it all started with the letters. Lots and lots of letters. The letters started showing up about a week later. The first one looked official enough that I almost laughed when I opened it. Ridgewood Meadows Homeowners Association. Bold logo. Fancy letterhead. A lot of words. And absolutely no authority over me whatsoever. According to Amelia, I was required to attend an upcoming HOA meeting to discuss community integration opportunities. I tossed it straight into the trash. A second letter arrived 3 days later. Then another. Then another. Before long, I had an entire stack sitting on my kitchen counter. Every one of them sounded more demanding than the last. At first it was almost amusing. Then the county inspectors started showing up. One afternoon I was feeding horses when a pickup truck pulled into the driveway. A code enforcement officer climbed out looking embarrassed before he'd even introduced himself. Mr. Harper? Yep. We received a complaint about unauthorized structures. I looked around. The barn had been standing since Ronald Reagan was president. The house was older than that. The fences were older than some marriages. The inspector spent 20 minutes walking the property before finally shaking his head. Sorry to waste your time. That became a familiar conversation. Environmental complaints, drainage complaints, noise complaints, agricultural complaints, fire safety complaints. One after another. Different departments, different inspectors. Same result. Nothing. Every single time. One younger inspector eventually admitted what everyone already knew. Off the record? He asked. Sure. We're pretty sure all these complaints are coming from the same person. I already knew exactly who that person was. The funny thing about bullies is that they usually believe persistence equals power. If something doesn't work once, they simply do it again. And again. And again. Until someone gives up. Unfortunately for Amelia, I'd spent nearly 4 decades dealing with people who confused stubbornness with strategy. She wasn't doing anything new. She was just doing it louder. By spring, the situation had escalated beyond letters and complaints. Residents from Ridgewood Meadows started appearing near my property. Groups of them, usually on weekends. Sometimes 10 people, sometimes 30. They'd gather along the fence line, pointing toward the ranch while Amelia stood there giving speeches like she was leading a revolution. One Saturday, I walked down to see what was happening. As soon as Amelia spotted me, her smile appeared. That same smile. The one that always looked rehearsed. Daniel, she called out. I hated when she used my first name. We weren't friends. We're just educating residents. About what? The trail system. I glanced at the crowd. A few looked uncomfortable. A few looked annoyed. Most seemed confused about why they were standing next to a stranger's ranch. Then Amelia pointed directly toward my property. This land could benefit everyone if certain people weren't being selfish. A few heads turned toward me. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about trails anymore. It wasn't even about access. This was about winning. Amelia had attached her reputation to the project. The more resistance she encountered, the more determined she became to force a victory. Some people become invested in being right. Others become addicted to not losing. There's a difference. A big difference. One night my daughter Rachel called. She'd heard about everything from a friend who lived near Ridgewood Meadows. You okay? She asked. Of course. You sound annoyed. I am annoyed. Should I be worried? I looked out the window toward the pasture. The sun was setting behind the hills. The horses were grazing. Everything looked peaceful. I've dealt with worse. That was true. At least I thought it was. 3 weeks later, I discovered how far Amelia was willing to go. I woke up early one morning planning to repair a section of fencing near the back road. When I reached the gate, something immediately felt wrong. The lock was gone. Not missing. Cut. Clean through. The chain hung loose against the post. At first I thought maybe someone had vandalized it. Then I saw the tire tracks. Fresh. Leading deep onto my property. My stomach tightened. I followed them nearly half a mile before finding bright orange trail markers attached to several trees. Someone had actually entered my ranch and started laying out a route. Like they already owned the place. For a long moment, I just stood there staring. Not angry. Not yet. Mostly surprised. Because crossing onto someone's property without permission is one thing. Planning a trail through it is something else entirely. I spent the rest of the day removing markers. Then I called a security company. By sunset, new cameras were installed around every major entrance. 2 days later, they earned every penny I paid. Around 2:30 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Motion alert. I rolled over. checked the live feed, and immediately sat upright. There she was. Amelia Cross. No mistake. No confusion. No misunderstanding. Amelia herself. Standing beside my gate carrying bolt cutters. She wasn't alone either. 2 HOA board members stood nearby, while she clipped through the chain like someone opening her own front door. Then they climbed into a utility vehicle and drove onto my property. I watched the entire thing from my bedroom. For nearly 20 minutes. Planting markers. Taking measurements. Pointing at different sections of land. Laughing. At one point Amelia actually posed for a photograph. On my ranch. After breaking in. The next morning, I saved every second of footage onto 3 separate hard drives. Old lawyer habit. Never trust a single copy. Then I called a contractor. Within 48 hours, a reinforced steel gate stood where the old one had been. Concrete posts. Commercial lock system. No shortcuts. No bolt cutters. No nonsense. I also sent Amelia something she'd never received before. Consequences. A formal cease and desist letter. Professionally written. Legally airtight. Delivered by certified mail. Most reasonable people would have stopped right there. Most reasonable people would have realized they'd crossed a line. Amelia wasn't most people. Because instead of backing down, she made the single biggest mistake of her entire life. She decided to sue me. And when that lawsuit arrived on my doorstep, neatly packaged in a thick envelope on a Friday afternoon, I remember standing in my kitchen reading it twice before pouring myself a bourbon and laughing harder than I had in years. Because the moment I saw the claims her attorney had filed, I knew something Amelia didn't. This wasn't her victory lap. This was the beginning of her collapse. The lawsuit was almost impressive in a strange way. Not because it was strong. Because it wasn't. It was the legal equivalent of throwing spaghetti at a wall and hoping something stuck. According to the complaint, I was obstructing community resources, interfering with historical access routes, harming neighborhood property values, and intentionally preventing public enjoyment of nature. There were pages and pages of accusations. What there wasn't was evidence. I sat at my kitchen table reading the documents while my bourbon slowly disappeared. Every claim rested on assumptions. Every argument depended on feelings. Not facts. Not records. Not law. Feelings. That's when I made a decision. For 5 years I'd been retired. 5 peaceful years. No courtrooms. No depositions. No endless legal arguments. But some opportunities are simply too entertaining to pass up. So I renewed a few credentials, dusted off some old habits, and filed my response personally. Not only did I deny every allegation, I countersued. Trespassing, property damage, harassment, defamation, and intentional interference with the peaceful enjoyment of private property. By the time the paperwork was filed, the entire situation had transformed. Amelia thought she was dragging me into court. In reality, she'd invited me back home. The hearing arrived 6 weeks later. The courtroom was packed. Apparently the drama had become local entertainment. Residents from Ridgewood Meadows filled several rows. A reporter from the county newspaper sat near the back. Even a few attorneys I knew from years ago showed up out of curiosity. Word travels fast in legal circles, especially when retired lawyers come back for one final fight. Amelia entered like a politician heading toward a campaign rally. Perfect hair, perfect suit, perfect confidence. Her attorney, a young guy named Trevor Blake, carried 3 large binders and enough arrogance to fill a stadium. Then the judge walked in. Judge Evelyn Parker. Sharp, fair, and absolutely impossible to fool. I'd appeared before her dozens of times before retirement. At first she didn't recognize me. Then she looked at the case file. Then at me. And suddenly smiled. Just slightly. Mr. Reed, she said. It has been a while. The room got very quiet. Amelia's expression shifted. Just a little. The hearing began. Trevor spoke first. For nearly 20 minutes, he painted me as a selfish old ranch owner refusing to cooperate with a growing community. According to him, families were suffering. Children were disappointed. Property values were being harmed. Community dreams were being destroyed. Honestly, if I hadn't known the facts myself, I might have felt bad. Then Judge Parker turned toward me. Mr. Reed, I stood. No dramatic speech. No theatrics. Just documents. Because documents don't get emotional. Documents don't exaggerate. Documents don't lie. I handed the court original property records dating back decades. County surveys, boundary maps, ownership histories, signed statements from previous owners. Every piece telling the same story. No easement, no trail rights, no public access, no HOA authority, nothing. Trevor's confidence started shrinking almost immediately. Then came the security footage. The first video showed Amelia cutting the lock. The second showed vehicles entering my property. The third showed trail markers being installed. The fourth showed Amelia posing for photographs while standing on land she didn't own. You could almost hear the oxygen leave the room. Judge Parker watched every second without saying a word. Then she looked directly at Amelia. "Is that you?" Amelia swallowed hard. "Well, yes, but thank you," the judge interrupted. Then I introduced the evidence that ended everything. A recording. Months earlier, during one of Amelia's little community gatherings near my fence line, she'd forgotten something important. Sound travels, especially in open country. One evening my outdoor camera had captured a conversation between Amelia and another board member. The recording wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be, because truth is usually more powerful than drama. The courtroom speakers crackled. Then Amelia's voice filled the room. Clear as day. "I don't care what the records say." A pause. Then another sentence. The sentence. "I'll make his life miserable until he gives me what I want." Silence. Complete silence. The kind that only happens when everyone realizes the story just changed. Trevor looked like he wanted to disappear. Amelia looked like she might faint. Judge Parker removed her glasses. That was never a good sign. After several long moments she spoke. "Do you have any evidence supporting your original claims?" Trevor shuffled through papers. More papers. Even more papers. Nothing. Finally he cleared his throat. "Not at this time, Your Honor." That was it. The fight was over. The ruling itself took less than 30 minutes. Every claim against me was dismissed. Every single one. Then the court addressed my counterclaims. Trespassing. Granted. Property damage. Granted. Harassment. Granted. Legal expenses. Granted. A permanent restraining order. Granted. Amelia was ordered to stay away from my property and pay substantial damages. But Judge Parker wasn't finished. Not even close. She formally referred parts of the case to the district attorney for further review. The look on Amelia's face when she heard that. I'll be honest. After everything she'd done, it was hard not to enjoy the moment. When the hearing ended, people flooded into the hallway. Residents who had supported Amelia suddenly couldn't leave fast enough. Board members avoided eye contact. The reporter practically sprinted toward the courthouse exit. Everyone wanted the story. 3 days later, Ridgewood Meadows held an emergency meeting. Amelia was removed as president. Unanimously. Not one vote in her favor. Months later, she accepted a plea deal related to the trespassing incident. The details weren't especially dramatic. Probation. Community service. Fines. The real punishment was something else entirely. Reputation. Because once trust disappears, getting it back is almost impossible. As for me, life eventually returned to normal. The ranch stayed quiet. The horses stayed happy. The sunsets kept showing up every evening exactly on schedule. And honestly, that's all I'd wanted from the beginning. Still, every now and then, usually when I'm sitting on the porch with coffee in hand, I think about how differently things could have ended. Because here's the uncomfortable question. Was Amelia always trying to help the community and simply went too far? Or was the trail project never really about the community at all? Was it about power? Control? Pride? I know what I think, but I'm curious what you think. If you were in my position, would you have handled things differently? And if you were one of those neighbors watching everything unfold, at what point would you have realized Amelia had crossed the line? Let me know down in the comments, because stories like this always seem to divide people right down the middle. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a difficult neighbor, or someone who thought the rules only applied to everyone else, I'd love to hear your story too.